Hello, and welcome to Self-Care is Sexy. My name is Chris, and I'll be your host. We're a podcast that's here to generate and share self-care ideas with each other. Last episode, we got into conflict, because conflict can arise whenever you're learning to set boundaries, or if you're trying to maintain boundaries as you're making time for self-care. I handed out some great tips that you can use to start to work with conflict in a way that's productive and de-escalates any heated situation. I want to give you a quick preview of what to expect from today's show. Today I'm bringing you a very special interactive episode that by the end of it, if you participate, you're going to walk away with your very own personalized guide to self-care that you can use to help make taking time for yourself the priority. Or you can, if you choose, to passively listen and gain some ideas on how you can generate a self-care system that will help give you back more of your own time and help you get closer to that favorite version of yourself. We're getting to all that after a quick break. Okay, welcome back. We're going to start out today's show with some good prompts for journaling. Now, if you're not into journaling or you're not in a reflective headspace, there's no problem. Just listen along and you're bound to get something out of these questions. So the first thing we're going to do in today's self-guided self-care is we're going to ask some questions. Now, you can sit down with this interactive episode and pause it as we go along to give yourself some time to write this shit down. Because I promise if you spend a little extra time on today's show, you will absolutely walk away with a complete personalized guide on self-care that's tailored especially for you. So let's get started. First, let's try to identify what area of our lives needs our attention the most. Now, this could be like the emotional or mental area of your life, your physical health, your finances or career, or it could be your family and relationships. And I just want to run through each of those different areas with some ways to get you thinking about each of them. That way you can find out which one needs the most attention. So I want to start by kind of breaking down, number one, the emotional or mental area of self-care. So some ways to identify if that needs the most attention is to ask, are you connected? Is there something going on that you need to process and reflect on? Because identifying the most predominant feeling that you're having right now is going to let you know if the feelings are strong, if your feels are all twisted up, the emotional or mental area of your life might need the most attention. If you have a hard time identifying your feels, I highly recommend getting a feeling wheel, or even better, create your own. This is going to help you to keep track. It's going to help you build up your emotional intelligence, and it's going to help identify the common denominator in the feelings that keep coming up on a regular basis. Number two, the other area of your life that could use some self-care could be your physical or your health. So some questions to get you thinking about that is, how's your physical well-being? Is there a lot of physical pain or sensation happening right now? What's your relationship with your body? Are you connected to your own well-being? So again, in trying to identify which area of our life needs our most attention, just start to think about your physical body and how much that topic's been coming up for you. If there's a big, giant red button flashing right now while I'm bringing this subject up, that's the one. Circle it. It needs your most attention. Number three, another area of your life that might need a lot of your attention is your finances or your career. So when we're trying to identify if this is our big target, it's no longer about asking, are you happy in your job? Are you fulfilled in your career? Are you living your purpose? It's better to identify it by asking, are you aligned? Does your job or your career or your finances align with you? Does it align with where you're at? Because for a lot of people, a career or a job is a means to an end. And our purpose and who we are, our identity is no longer wrapped up in that. It just happens to be the thing that we contribute our energy in for an exchange of money. So don't get it too twisted. Just very generally think about what keeps coming up for you the most. What's the big problem? What's pissing you off? If it's your bank account, if it's your job, that's the area that needs your focus. Number four, and last on the list of the areas, is your family or your relationships. So when I'm talking about the area of your life that is about family and relationships, if you have a lot of turmoil coming up, I just did an episode last week about conflict. So go check that out for some conflict resolution that can help get that area of your life in line. But if this is an area, the relationship part of your life is really popping up for you, I want you to focus more on the relationship that you have with yourself. If you can clear up that relationship, every other relationship is going to benefit. So when we're looking at and identifying the area of our life and we're thinking about our relationships in our family, I want you to include that relationship you have with yourself. So again, our first step today was to identify the areas of our lives. Could be number 1, emotional or mental. Number 2, physical or health. Number 3, finance, career. And number 4, family relationship, including the relationship with yourself. And if you're still having a hard time and cannot figure out which area of your life needs the most self-care attention right now, ask yourself the following 3 questions. Number 1, if you only had 1 year to live from today, 1 year from today, what would you do with your time? What would you make your priority? What would be the ultimate goal you would try to reach? Number 2, if you only had a week to live, what would you do with that time? How would you spend your energy in that space? And last but not least, number 3, if you only had 1 day to live, what would you do with that time? So again, if you're interacting with this episode and you're really utilizing it as a tool to help you right now, hopefully you're pausing it and you're writing out the answers to these questions. That's really the aim of this interaction, because getting the data out of your head and onto paper is really the most valuable tool that I can hand you. I cannot dig down into my Magoo bag of a purse and hand you the ability to make self-care the priority. I can only talk to you through this microphone and pray that some of this wisdom is dispensed on you and that you interact with it. You decide your level of involvement. So if you're willing to take the time and write down some of this stuff, you're going to have an incredible pile of data in which you can glean from ideas and tips going forward for yourself that's personalized to what's going on for you. Now, secondly, in the show today, we're going to identify what do you need in each of these areas. So whereas before we're trying to identify which area is the priority, we're now going to go back to each of those 4 areas and we're going to decide, we're going to tease out what we need in each of those areas. So the questions I'd like you to reflect on when you're looking at the different areas in your life. Number 1, what is the most important thing I can do for myself for self-care today? What is the most important thing I can do for myself for self-care today? This is imperative. Get used to asking yourself this question a lot. The most important thing you can do indicates which area of your life needs your attention. Number 2, how can I best take care of myself today? How can I best take care of myself today? How can I show up for myself? What can I do? How we do something is just as important as what we do. So if you are needing some extra compassion, you're needing a little bit more attention than normal, you're needing a little bit more rest than normal, whatever it is, how can you provide yourself the self-care you need in that way? So let me make this a tangible example. Let's say you went through the questions before and you're deciding that your physical health, your body needs your most attention right now. And then you've decided that you're going to look at what could you do for yourself today? What's the most important thing you could do to help that physical self-care? And let's say that is getting active. You're like, the most important thing I can do for my body, for my physical self-care today is to get active, to get out there and get moving. But you also recognize, because we're human beings and we're complex and both things can be true at once, that you're tired, you're run down. Maybe you had a late night. Maybe it's been hot and you can't sleep, whatever it is. How can you best take care of yourself? Well, if you know the what is getting active, but you know that you're tired, the how is going to be gentler. How can you deliver that self-care? I can dial my workout down a little bit. I can do some stretching or some yoga, or I can take a walk, or I can get in the pool and do some swimming. Something a little less rigorous than balls out weight training, hour run uphill both ways. So I hope that you're starting to get the picture of how working with these questions and these reflections are going to help you build a very personalized self-care. Now, cheat code, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I have an episode coming up in the next few weeks about how to make a protocol, a self-care protocol. And if you've not seen this, I'll put it up on my website, but I have like a little recipe box that has little note cards on it with different scenarios that I come up against in my life. And then I have a self-care protocol for those scenarios. The reflection work that we're doing in today's episode is a precursor to creating that. And believe me, friends, having a protocol in place is essential for your future self-care. Because when you are run down, when you're tired, when the shit hits the fan, when life is not going the way you want it to, and it's out there lifing on you, having those preset protocols in place will save your ass every time. All right, so getting back to identifying what we need in each of those different areas. Number 4, if I was not me and I was my own friend, what would I suggest that I do for some self-care today? So this question is asking you to step outside of yourself, look at yourself objectively, and give yourself that same grace and that same leeway that you would give a good friend who's struggling right now. We really want you to start identifying yourself outside of yourself, because when you identify yourself from inside yourself, you're covered and shrouded with all of your negative self-talk. You're immersed in your own idea of what you need to do. You're pushing yourself harder than you need to. So stepping outside of yourself gives you a different perspective, helps you to be more loving and self-compassionate. Number 4, what is the smallest act of self-care I can do right now? So I want you to think about your circumstances right now. And if you're not participating full on in this episode, you're not pausing and writing between each of these questions. If you're just going along in your life and you happen to stumble along this podcast, welcome to the shit show. You're getting all of me today. I do want you to really reflect about this, because even if you're not full on participating in the show today, asking yourself this question throughout the day is really going to help you start to identify the very smallest thing you can do. So what is the smallest act of self-care you can do right now? Well, you're listening to the podcast, so you're off to a good start. That means that you're craving some content, you're wanting some ideas, you're getting entertained by my silliness. But I want us to step outside of that a little bit further and start to think about what is the smallest thing I can do. And that practice of really reflecting on what is the smallest thing I can do, it does a couple things when we start to identify those things. It puts us in the moment where we're thinking about ourselves, not in an egotistical way, but we're thinking about ourselves in a practical self-care manner. We're thinking about our most basic needs. And this is one of the most fundamental pieces to self-care. This is why you don't need a 5 a.m. routine or a bunch of bath products and bullshit. The smallest self-care is the most important self-care. And that self-care turns out to not be on the shelf somewhere. It turns out to be within arm's reach. It's just about identifying and putting into practice, asking yourself these questions consistently, so that becomes the habit. The folks that have self-care on lock, they have a confidence about themselves. They have the ability to be in any situation and be adaptable, making sure that their needs are met so that the most helpful, most compassionate version of themselves is showing up. When we're tired, when we're thirsty, when we're hungry, when we're lonely, when we're bored, when we're not inspired, when we're in a negative headspace, that makes us trash human beings to other human beings around us. And in those moments, if we are focused on how do I take care of myself with the ultimate goal of being helpful to others, it really is cyclical. And it is important, and it will give you a much more fulfilled and peaceful existence if you make this the priority. So again, when we're trying to identify what we need in each of those areas, the questions we're going to ask, number one, is what is the most important thing I can do for myself for self-care today? Number two, how can I best take care of myself today? Number three, if I wasn't me and I was my own friend, what would I suggest to myself to do for self-care? Number four, what's the smallest act of self-care that I can do right now? Next, we're going to identify what could get in the way. Now, if you've been following the podcast for a while, you've listened along, and you might notice that whenever I'm doing an interview with somebody, I tend to ask towards the end of the conversation, after I've teased out all of the tips and tricks from the people I'm interviewing, I ask a lot of people, what happens when you don't get the self-care you need? And the reason we want to identify that, we don't want to spend a bunch of time on it, but the reason we identify that is because knowing the pitfalls, knowing the barriers, knowing the things that could get in our way helps us manage our reactions, our expectations, and the direction we're going with it. So some questions that we can ask ourselves to identify what's getting in the way of self-care. Number one, we ask ourselves, where am I feeling overwhelmed? Now, the answer to this question could be a physical location, but what we're aiming at with this prompt is to identify what area of your life is most overwhelming. Don't get it twisted. It might overlap with what area of your life needs the most self-care, but it might not. Identifying what part of your life is the most overwhelming is going to give you a focus of where the cleanup crew needs to be sent. It's also going to give you a focus of where you need to build a plan. Number two, who's cock blocking me right now? Now be careful when we're identifying the people in our lives. It's very easy to look at the external people and judge and criticize and say, if not for them, I would get the self-care I need. When the real truth is, if not for you and your inability to set boundaries and identify conflict and go through it in a productive way, you would be able to have a relationship with somebody and not allow them to cock block you from any of your self-care or your time to be recharging and things like that. I want you to be able to identify the person, but I also don't want you to make them the focus or the cause of your lack of self-care. Knowing the person, again, is going to help give you a focus on how to plan around that. Number three, ask yourself, am I creating more time and space for myself? So when it comes down to making self-care the priority, and when we're shifting our mindset from being people-pleasing or being codependent or just not making self-care the priority at all, one of the biggest things we have to get good at is not lying to ourselves about the pockets of time and the resources that it takes to create self-care routines or incorporate self-care into our days. Each area of your life, whether it's the physical, emotional, financial, all of those different areas, truth is they have pockets of time where you could create time and space within them. So we have to be vigilant. We have to be aware of the lies that we're telling ourselves. If you have the time to doom scroll TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, whatever, and get all the recent news and gossip, but you don't have time to go to the gym or meal prep, you have to be aware of that lie. And again, I'm not asking you to correct your behavior or change your routine. Just noticing and being aware that it's not space, it's not time, it's not resources that are preventing you from making self-care a priority. It's literally that you're choosing something else. And when we get more honest about those things, then we can make a plan. Last but not least, and probably the most important way that we can identify what's getting in the way of our self-care is, what am I blaming? What am I blaming for my lack of self-care? Do I keep saying that I don't have enough time? I don't have enough money? If I had my own space in the house? If only I could take a week vacation and just not have any responsibilities at all? What are you blaming for your lack of self-care? Identifying that and really digging into that, really working on that and teasing that out, again, is going to give you the focus. Where do we need to send the medics to stop the bleeding? right? This is a triage situation. We're looking for what's wrong so we can fix the most wrongest thing, the loudest alarm that will give us a little peace and ease, then we can focus on the other things. Okay, so now that we've identified the area of our life that needs the most attention, and we've identified what each of those areas needs, and we've even teased out some of the things that are getting in our way, the last part of today's interactive show is actually making the plan. We got to make a plan to help us have some certainty. Having a plan in place is key for later on. Like I said, I've got an episode coming up about how to create self-care protocols. But if you're interested in creating protocols for your future self-care ideas, this is a great way to get started. We're going to start, number one, with the most glaring need. So planning self-care for the future requires that we understand something very fundamental when it comes to planning and when it comes to self-development and self-help and self-care. And that is, we are a lot like bamboo. So if you don't know a lot about how bamboo grows, this seed of bamboo lays in the murkiest, darkest, grossest water ever. And it's in this dark place where it doesn't know what's going on. There's a lot of uncertainty, and it lays dormant for years. But once it pokes its little head up and it starts to grow, I don't know if you ever dealt with bamboo, but that shit is like weeds. You cannot get it to stop growing. And I really want us to start thinking about this kind of growth and where we're at in that cycle to identify where the most glaring need is. Which part of the cycle are you in right now? Are you in the seeding cycle, that uncertainty, that dark, that murkiness, that questioning what's going to happen? Or are you in that accelerated growth period? Maybe you're just about to hit the surface of the water. Some bamboo grows in water. And so maybe you're just about to peak. And there's this excitement, but there's also some fear and chaos going on. But identifying which part of this cycle, this growth cycle that you're in, is going to help you in the planning phase. We've got to know where we're at to know what the blueprint for where we're going looks like. Number two, you got to pick a time and a place for creating the plan. Now, I know this sounds silly when I'm talking about planning for self-care. We got to plan. Abso-fucking-lutely, friends. We have to plan to plan. If you plan your meals, if you plan your exercises, if you plan your calendar, why wouldn't you incorporate planning your self-care? But picking a time and a place for planning is so important. There's got to be an element of consistency. Because here's the thing, folks. Knowing the why you don't get self-care in or why you're not able to make time for self-care doesn't matter. You can spend thousands of dollars digging through the past to try and figure out why you can't do it. And that's really pointless. It's not going to help you if you don't have a realistic plan on how to change that. And this realistic plan isn't about getting to a perfect version of you that takes time for self-care every single moment of every single day and has a positive outlook on yourself in all situations. The idea of making self-care a priority is about taking yourself where you're at now, looking objectively at your life, and being a little bit more compassionate, giving yourself a little bit more grace, incorporating some leeway into this, but having a plan of action for when you don't have the strength, energy, or mood to do the self-care. So number 3, you want to make sure that each step to this plan is easy. We're doing little tiny level ups here. You want to start exactly where you are, keep it realistic, and make sure that the goal of self-care is at the top of this list. This is the top priority. Remember we talked about earlier, it's about how you're doing something. It's not just what you're doing for self-care, it's how you're doing it. Depending on where you're at, you're going to need different things on different days. You're complicated. Last but not least, and certainly most important when it comes to creating a self-care plan, is acknowledge that you will fail. Not if, but when. You will absolutely fail. That is not the worst news ever. We've got to learn to appreciate our failures because failure does so much for us. Our failures teach us what doesn't work. It eliminates ideas. The self-care and self-help world is flooded with information. There's hundreds of podcasts about self-care. There's thousands of books. You could scroll TikTok endlessly to get self-care ideas. And what you're going to find out is that as you try these ideas, when they don't work, you're eliminating a bunch of different work so that when it comes up again, you're narrowing the field. You're starting to see the scope of what you're aiming at get smaller and smaller and smaller. Because failure helps clarify what it is we're really looking for. Failure sets out these bumpers. Like if you're going bowling and there's bumpers on the side for when you were a kid and that way the ball doesn't go in the gutter, that's exactly what failure is. Too often our society tries to put this binary idea in our head that there's winners and losers, that there's success and failure. And I'm here to tell you there's a lot of degrees in between. Each time you fail at something that you try, you learn a little bit more on what doesn't work. So that gives us new direction. And most importantly, failing, it helps others. When we talk about our failures, when we talk about an endeavor that we tried and it didn't work out the way we thought it would, other people that we're expressing this to, they're gleaning from us the failures that we've had so that they can adjust whatever they're aiming towards a little bit differently. All right, so again, those 4 steps to creating the self-care plan. Number 1, start with the most glaring need. Number 2, pick a time and place to do this plan. Number 3, make each step easy. Number 4, acknowledge that you will fail. All right, friends, that's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. If you have a story you'd like to share and you want to be on the show, please email me. It's Chris, Kris, at selfcareissexy.com. Okay, we got some really great content coming your way, so stay tuned. And remember that self-care is sexy. We're giving you permission to put yourself first.